Here on the channel, I post a lot of hypothetical videos, sometimes discussing the very small possibilities of certain countries breaking apart and forming several smaller new ones. And in most cases, those are very unlikely possibilities. However, in each continent, there are a few countries that do, in fact, have some real risk of separation. In this video, we're going to talk about Europe and the countries in it that do, at the moment, have a separation risk. If the video does well, I can do this for other continents as well. There aren't many countries in this situation in Europe, at least right now. Even countries like Spain or the United Kingdom, which have active and large independence or secession movements, like the ones in Catalonia or Scotland, are, at least at this moment, unlikely to break up. The tension in Catalonia seems to have dialed down since their unilateral declaration of independence and Spain's strong response to it. And some polls now show the Scottish not so eager to pursue independence, at least at the moment. But there are still a few other countries in Europe that are at a risk of breaking up. So in this video, we'll be taking a look at the three I think have the most present risk: Ukraine, Bosnia, and Belgium. What we want to understand for these three cases is why they are at a risk of separation, how the separation would take place and what it would look like, and what the consequences of it would be. I did a whole video on Bosnia's case recently, so I'm gonna leave a quick summary of that to the end and start with the other two, beginning with Ukraine. In 2014, Ukraine was stripped of a key part of its territory as Russia invaded and occupied the peninsula of Crimea. Simultaneously, Russian-backed separatists took up arms against the Ukrainian government in the east of the country. These areas are Donetsk and Luhansk. Eventually, a ceasefire was established between the government and the separatists, but the issue still remains and is now boiling up to another period of high tension. So why is this the case? Why did Ukraine suddenly lose Crimea? Why did it lose control over these eastern parts of their country? And why is it likely, or at least possible, that the country will sadly be separated in the near future? The answer here is complicated and has a lot of factors that I'll try to explain, but it mostly comes down to one thing: Russia. Starting with the example of Crimea and why Russia felt it should be under their control today. The main city in Crimea, Sevastopol, was founded by the Russians in 1783 and has maintained a Russian population majority ever since. The whole of Crimea itself was also a part of Russia and was only given to Ukraine when the two were part of the Soviet Union, sort of as an internal territory reorganization in 1954. At the time, the transfer was described as a gift to commemorate the 300th anniversary of the Treaty of Pereyaslav in 1654, when the Cossacks of the area decided to unify with Muscovy, putting in place the eventual acquisition of Ukraine by Russia. We can see it here on the first page of the official newspaper of the Soviet Union, Pravda. Now, this isn't to excuse Russia's behavior, they just took part of another country's territory unilaterally, but it does allow us to understand the argument they try to present as justification. And we can see it on this ethno-linguistic map of the country. Crimea is almost in its entirety of Russian majority, while the eastern border areas are only significantly Russian in ethnicity, meaning the majority of the population isn't Russian, but a big part is. And even if that is the case, the majority of the population speaks Russian, which brings them closer to a Russian identity. But even if we assume that these areas are filled with Russian people and that they do want to join Russia, why does Russia agree to help them? It could just be out of the solidarity of Russia towards Russians, but there is an additional strategic reason. Russia becomes increasingly surrounded by NATO, and the threat of backing Ukrainian rebels seems to discourage Ukraine from joining NATO. Essentially, they don't like losing influence in their surrounding regions, and even less to see those regions now influenced by their rivals. These areas of Donetsk and Luhansk have proclaimed independence, but they are de jure still a part of Ukraine, even if they are de facto independent. Before we keep going with the video, a quick message from sponsor and friend of the channel, Blinkist. Blinkist is one of the best apps that exists, honestly, and you can use it to quickly read or listen to books. They know that one of the biggest issues people face when wanting to read or learn about a topic is time, and so they fix that issue for you. Blinkist takes thousands of non-fiction books, extracts their key points, and condenses them into short 15-minute listening or reading sessions. I'm a user of the app, and I even get video ideas from some of the books. I just found this great series that they have called Bedtime Biographies. I'm currently listening to the one about Napoleon Bonaparte. If you want to read more and learn more, but don't have much time to do it, Blinkist is a great option information for you. The first 100 people to go to Blinkist.com/general knowledge will get a free 1-week trial of the app and also a 25% discount if you choose to keep your membership after that. So if you want, I would highly recommend trying it out. Now back to the video. The Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic are the entities created to rule over them, but they are essentially Russian puppets. They didn't even try to hide it with the flags that they chose. However, when we look at a map of the control of the country, these are very small areas, and the Ukrainian government has managed to exert their control over most of the land, even in the other eastern border regions. So it would be unlikely that the whole eastern part of the country would be lost unless Russia fully invaded. In this case, a possible separation would likely look just like the one that took place in Crimea, with these areas first becoming independent and then choosing to join the Russian Federation. So a new country would not exist. The current one would just get slightly smaller. I would say out of the 3 cases in this video, this is the one at the highest risk of happening in the short term, because it kind of already is. Moving on to Belgium. In this map of Europe, we can see the results of a poll. It divides Europe into regions and asks people, do you feel most attached to the European Union, your country, or your region? And we can see how in orange some places choose the region. Many of these are locations in which independence movements exist: Galicia, Andalusia, Catalonia, Brittany, Bavaria, Venice, and importantly for this video, Flanders and Wallonia. Flanders and Wallonia are the 2 regions that make up Belgium, along with the capital of Brussels. There is also a small border area in which Germans are the majority, but it's not its own internal entity. Flanders is more culturally similar to the Netherlands, while Wallonia is closer to France. The first speaks Flemish, closer to the Dutch language, and the latter speaks French. And the 2 might soon become independent, dissolving Belgium as a unified state. In a 2019 poll, 40% of Flemish people were in support of independence. These numbers would have to go up if an official vote was held, but this is a sign that right now a lot of people want Flanders to become its own country. Even today, they already have a large degree of autonomy within the Belgian Federation. The division in culture dates back a long time. Belgium used to be a part of the Low Countries along with the Netherlands and Luxembourg, a set of more or less independent fiefdoms associated with both France and the Holy Roman Empire. When the Dutch became independent, they actually held Belgium as a part of their country until 1839, when the Belgians became independent, some say only to satisfy the strategic interest of Great Britain in continental Europe. And even at the time, Wallonia was already more connected to France, due to, in part, the French invasions of Napoleon, while Flanders always had more of a connection to their previous ruler of the Netherlands. Just before independence, there was an alternative partition plan for Belgium, in which the Dutch kept Flanders, France got a part of Wallonia, and Prussia the other along with Luxembourg. And so we can tell that despite having strong regional identities, there's not a big Belgian national identity, just a mix of French, Dutch, and small German influence, depending on where you are. If separated, these countries could either become independent or each join the Netherlands and France respectively, or even follow that previous partition plan, with Brussels perhaps becoming its own independent city-state. It's also the capital of the European Union, so that would perhaps need to be taken into account. This is a present issue, and I believe the risk of separation truly exists, but not in a conflictual way like Ukraine or what we'll see with Bosnia. This is more of a situation where probably a lot of people on both sides would want to see it happen. And finally, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Like I mentioned, I did a whole video on this. The link is in the description, so if you want a fuller look into it, check that out. Here I'll just present a summary. Bosnia and Herzegovina's name refers to not 2 different political entities, but to 2 different geographical regions. The 2 entities are instead the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which comprises the region with mostly Bosnian and Croat people, and then Republika Srpska, where mostly Serbian people live. The 2 areas were in conflict when Bosnia declared its independence from Yugoslavia at the time it dissolved, and the peace deal eventually led to a political system that is made up of these 2 entities. Even the country's presidency is divided, but in 3, with a Croat, Bosnian, and Serb representative. And it's in this Bosnian-Serbian president that the issue lies. The 2 regions of the country are incredibly autonomous and self-functioning, and their union relies essentially on 3 main aspects. They have a joint army, a joint judiciary, and a joint tax administration. Well, this president has announced or threatened that Republika Srpska would be creating its own institutions in these 3 areas, effectively dissolving the union and perhaps provoking a conflict. This internal separation has been an issue ever since Bosnia became independent, and honestly it seems like the way it is now was somewhat of a quick fix at the time, a band-aid that didn't really solve the deep issue of the country being somewhat culturally divided divided, although perhaps this isn't as big of an issue as we believe, and it may only come from the desire of leaders and not the population itself. There was a threat to move on with effective secession in November of 2021. This didn't happen, but the issue remains, and it is likely that it will arise in the near future again, perhaps leading to a tragic conflict once again, provoking the separation of Bosnia and Herzegovina as we know it. So those are 3 European countries that are somewhat at a real risk of separating at this time. I would say Ukraine and Bosnia have a real short-term risk, and Belgium more of a medium term, perhaps on par with the UK or Spain. The thing is, with the UK and Spain, we have had moments where independence was possible, with Scotland's failed referendum and Catalonia's unsuccessful declaration of independence. So, despite the fact that perhaps these regions have a bigger desire for independence, in Belgium this has not yet culminated in an attempt. So I think there's a bigger possibility that it might happen when compared to Scotland or Catalonia. In the 3 cases of this video, one is simply due to cultural differences, another because of an external threat and historical issue regarding its territory, and another due to, in part, also cultural differences, but also somewhat of an external issue. While Flemish and Wallonians are connected to the Dutch and French, they are more of a subset in their own culture, and as far as I know, neither France or the Netherlands supports Belgium breaking up, while Bosnian Serbs are, for all purposes except their passport, Serbs. And there is a Serbia country which happens to be right next to it, and which might support this claim, as well as eastern Ukraine having a lot of Russians which have the support of Russia. I would say Bosnia's case is more similar to Ukraine, although while Russia seems to take an active role in Ukraine, Serbia does not seem to do so in Bosnia. Thanks so much for watching this video. Leave a comment below with your opinions. Do you think these countries might actually separate in the near future, and would you like to see that happen or not? And are there any other countries in Europe and the world that are currently at the risk of separating? Remember to subscribe if you want, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.